I've been asked a question on one of my videos on YouTube, which is the Zettelkasten for Technical Learning video. And the question comes from Timmy the Rookie. He says, "Hey Martin, thanks for sharing your flows. If you have a moment, then I would like to ask you this though. When learning something completely novel, this form you present makes sense. What about practical projects? When doing product development, writing grants, or building a company, one doesn't have time to sit and synthesize every concept and thought, nor double back with everything that they have learned to add references and links and separate into comprehensive notes. When I'm writing a grant, I'll go through hundreds of documents, word of mouth, own expertise, combine the ideas and polish it so it looks just like what the evaluator wants. And I'll have 2 to 3 days to do this, not months. How do I deal with the information if there is so much of it in such a short time, with no time to slow down? How do I pick and choose the bits that I will actually have time to write down to be those that I will actually have to use for later on, compared the vast majority of which will never come up again, will become irrelevant due to time, or become so obvious to me it doesn't need writing down?" Great question. This is a good example of where the theory of the Zettelkasten and what I'm teaching on YouTube now is being put into practice. And it's like, how do I put those together? So while I may not have a definitive answer because there's a lot of nuance with these things, I have some thoughts, and we'll just go into those here. So I made some notes here. I've boiled down the problem, and really I'll talk to the points where I think could be useful at navigating this. So the challenges. So with practical projects like product development or writing grants or building a company, there's no time to sit down and actually synthesize every concept or thought. And writing can involve going through hundreds of documents, word of mouth, own expertise, and combining those ideas that you just kind of have bubbling around. The time frame is in days, not months, and a lot of the information will be irrelevant or redundant after the project. Okay, so yes, the biggest constraint here is time. Time is the major constraint, so the focus does need to be on the most valuable part. And the question here is, how do you know what's going to be valuable? Especially if you're starting a project and you're gathering information, you're essentially doing the rapid capture. So you're sifting through documents, you're consolidating the conversations you've had, the insights you've got, and you're trying to bring it all together, presumably into a project or a pitch or a proposal. Interesting, at this very moment of time, I'm doing this very type of work at the moment. I've got a couple of days to finish a strategy document, and I'm pulling in research from all over the place. And no, I don't have time to go and do a proper Zettelkasten. So yeah, I understand where this problem is coming from. But if I were to think of, like, if you want to invest in this knowledge system and you want to have something that is organic and grow over time, which is a snapshot of your understanding of the sort of bigger projects, then I would say to look at what is common across different projects. So if you're within the same industry, essentially. So if you work in software development and you're putting proposals together for maybe grants for projects, there will be common themes. And I don't know the specifics, so I can't really talk to that. But if I were to imagine, some themes could be more mission oriented. And what I mean by that is when you're creating a grant or you're pitching an idea, you're correlating that to some benefit of someone else. And that understanding could be a common theme across project to project. So I'll give an example. I'm just going to pluck an idea, any idea. So imagine you are working in, say, the technology space of social media, and you are trying to understand the impact of social media on teenagers, for example. Now, you're putting a pitch together or a project together to maybe introduce some kind of recommendations or maybe software changes to do with that. But what is common across that is any research or studies that correlate or have an implication to that field. So you might come across studies about the impact of happiness in teenagers when using social media, the impact of bullying, all the different kinds of things, and then maybe some positive things such as how friendships are formed. There might be research there, and that's something you would collate over time as and when they come, and you sort of park them in your knowledge system, knowing that they can be useful. Those types of things can be understood in isolation. Do you understand that research? Is this research valid? When would you use it? That is an example of where some type of knowledge work could be useful. What is difficult in the real world is that when you might know the research is there and you might have heard about it, or you might go search for it in the moment in the project, but you don't have time to really read it, comprehend it, and all of that. And that will, this is the time constraint. That will always be the case. You either have time to do something or you don't. There's no magic between the two. But if you did do it, and you can maybe consolidate some of those thoughts in a project, but bank them for future projects where you say, okay, well, here's something that I understand about the impact of social media on teenagers. That is something that is useful going forward. Industry specific, I'm working on an SEO, search engine optimization kind of content strategy. So there'll be things in there that is knowledge and assumptions that you will base further opinions on, and that is the kind of thing that I think you need to reason about carefully, so that you have a well articulated argument, and also double checking yourself that you're not making assumptions in the wrong way. So for example, in a search engine optimization world, you might say that link building, having links back to your website from other publications, is the most valuable thing. And that could be an assumption, and you can start driving a strategy based on that assumption. And then one day someone says, but it's not relevant anymore. That was dead years ago. And you're like, but that's not what I thought. But having that in your system, that is, knowledge that you would take from project to project, when that gets challenged, you can then sort of update your knowledge in that way, rather than trying to hold everything in your head. So that's where my head goes to in that sense. What is common across projects. So very industry specific without knowing. I've tried to give some examples, but without knowing a specific industry, it's hard to know if that's practical or not. The other thing is you can use your knowledge system to just catalog the documents you've got. There's nothing worse where you've seen something and you want to pull it into a project. You're like, where did I see it? And I've had this again with the SEO. I have recollections of things being said about the value of dwell time on a website for organic ranking, right? I have in the back of my mind something that I've assumed for a very long time. Now I'm trying to say, is this still relevant? Where did I see that? And I'm trying to find it, and I'm trying to Google it, and it's old, but I'm trying to see what the difference is between what's being said now and what was said then, so we know where our strategy is changing. But I don't have it catalogued. So having things catalogued in that sense makes it easier to just find the things that you want when you want. And a good tip is, as you put it into your knowledge system, add some words, like pretend that it's 6 months or 12 months in the future. What would you search to find this thing? Make just quick notes, put the keywords, put the search terms in, so that when you search your softwares, whether using Obsidian or whatever, you will find it because it's using the terminology that you would naturally use. And oftentimes I will find that, what was it called? I'm sure it was this, and I'm trying to use a specific phrase, but of course the document didn't use that. That's just how I remembered it. So tagging your search terms with the documents can be quite useful. It shouldn't take long to do, just to do that. But of course, not everything will be useful, and you could end up collecting things that you don't want. Again, use a bit of intuition. If something is relevant now but not really later, then you don't have to capture it. But or maybe archive it once you've captured it, just so you know if in case you get it wrong, it's still retrievable. The other thing is a lot of it can be conversations with colleagues, conversation with consultants, and that will build your body of knowledge and expertise. A lot of the things that I know about, say, SEO, is because I've worked with agencies, had those conversations, I've probed, I've dug in, and I'm building, over the years, I've built my mental model, and then I'm combining that with other things, to the point where I would feel confident running my own SEO agency to a degree, because over the last 20 years, I've put it into practice in my core business. So there is an element of having knowledge gained through expertise, which is a good way to understand that is, if you were replaced by someone else in your job, what would they need from you to be able to do the same job effectively? And that's your kind of expertise that you bring to the table. Now, where do you put those? It is useful to just make a record of conversations or thoughts, and it does two things. One, it actually makes you, remember, but B, it makes you really understand what it is that was said in a way that's sort of, it's like a save file. It captures it in that moment in time, and it helps you reason about the thinking of it. So that's kind of what I did, or I'm doing with my strategy document, is I'm putting down over the last number of weeks, I've been capturing all the quotes, all the things we said, all the ideas just in one place, ready for refining later. And that's part of the process. Those in turn could go into a knowledge vault, like Zettelkasten, if you have the time to do it. But time's always the constraint with these things. So I do think there's value in recording things that were said. We love the idea that we'll remember things, and some people are good at it, some people are not so good. But more importantly, if we have a conversation, we're like, great, that's top of my mind, I'll remember that. Chances are that 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, 5 weeks' time, you won't remember it. That's just human nature. You have the forgetting curve. Things that are recent have more prominence in your mind, and then as you don't pay attention to it over the coming weeks, your memory does fade. That's just what happens. So I would advocate for recording those conversations. And then, really what we're talking about is, you've got a project, you've got lots of research to go into that project, and you've got to deliver on that in a short time frame. That is a top-down project, because you don't have the months beforehand to start building up the layers. So you need to be really smart about it. And there's no simple answer to this. You want to be building foundations as you go in the top-down process. So yes, you could put things, say, into a Google Doc, or you could put things into your note system and the Google Doc at the same time, right? One of them is then laying the path forward for the future. You could do that, whether that's practical, whether that's adds more overhead, you never know. If you don't do it, well, what's the reality is, you'll start a new project, you either might end up going over it all again, or you'll start bringing in previous projects into that project. You can do that, but it has all the problems that Zettelkasten is designed to solve, in a sense, having atomic ideas, breaking things down. You don't have to sift through massive documents just to get the one bit that's relevant to you. You can link them in much easier. So yes, the Zettelkasten should solve this. And I don't think the Zettelkasten itself is the main issue. The main issue is to deeply understand something. It requires more than a couple of days' work, right? To deeply understand, to synthesize, requires more time. And that is what is the question here. And is there a way of keeping that time cost down, but also creating a depth of knowledge going forward? And I don't know the answer. I think it could be very individual depending on your approach, but I think the foundation of it is having a good system of organizing what you do as you do it, so that you enable the ability to synthesize later if you have the time for it. I'll tell you what it's like. It's like mowing the lawn. It's a bit of a tangent. So you can mow the lawn every 2, 3, 4 weeks in the summer months, and it can be quite a chore because the grass has grown quite high, and mowing it and getting it back down can be quite labour intensive and all of that. Or you could get a robot robot lawnmower, and you think, well, what do they do with all the grass cuttings? What they do is they mow frequently and often and mulch it down, right? So they're just taking little bits at a time. That is maybe the approach here. You want to keep going frequently, but very light touch, and let it build up, through the offcuts of the work that you do in each project, rather than big bang kind of, right, I've got 3 months to go and properly understand this thing, synthesize it, do all of that. So that's where my head goes to there. Little and often, but what makes that possible is an organization of the work behind. And I think if you get, this is why I like the Zettelkasten, if you get comfortable with it, it is designed to not be completely encompassing. It is create capture notes, create your fleeting notes, right? And then, did you understand what you just wrote? That's your understanding notes or your literature notes. And then, okay, how can I use this with other things that I want to bring together? Those are your permanent notes. Okay, now just stick those in the project, right? That's sort of the thinking. It may work, it might not work. I will throw this in as an additional. We're talking projects rather than knowledge systems. I quite like the POWER method. So projects, areas, resources, and archive. That's Tiago Forte's Building Second Brain. That is, I think that can work in harmony with a knowledge system like the Zettelkasten, where your projects, so your areas are essentially the things you are responsible for. So if you are, take the social media example, you're responsible for online safety, for example. That's an area. And then your projects are, right, in the next 4 weeks, we need to deliver something that solves this problem. Okay, so that becomes something that you rapidly work through. A project is something that has a start and an end. If it's something that doesn't have an end, it's generally an area. And if your projects are incompletable because of something that drags on, it should be multiple projects. Right? I believe short projects that you can complete because it feels good. Your resources are the things that are available to you to enable you to do those projects. That could, in theory, be your knowledge system, like a Zettelkasten. Could just be an archive of documents, collection of conversations that are useful over time. An archive is anything that is no longer relevant. You can put it to one side. So maybe the POWER method is also useful to approach when it comes to these short, rapid projects, with your areas being the things you're responsible for and your resources being that kind of wider Zettelkasten-esque knowledge system of, okay, I've done the work on this project, but that is actually useful on another project, or how does this project relate to that project? That's an idea. Let's capture that. So I hope this has been helpful. I really enjoy the idea of having questions come through and using it as an opportunity to create a new video. So if you have any Zettelkasten questions, drop them below and maybe it will feature in a new video. Thank you.